What's going on, all of my friends, people, countrymen, everything else under the sun? How are you doing tonight? Welcome to our first ever podcast. I am your host, Antonio MTG, with my co host, Gigapon, and this is the Barrier to Entry podcast, episode number 1. Thank you for everybody that's coming out to watch. And if you are watching us on YouTube and watching this podcast on YouTube, don't forget to hit that like button, hit that subscribe, hit the little bell to get notifications as we are constantly putting up content for your viewing pleasure. So thank you everyone for showing up. As I said, I'm Antonio MTG. This is Gigapon. Say hello, Giga.
Hey, what's going on, everybody?
And we are your hosts tonight for the Barrier to Entry podcast. So we're gonna so since this is our first episode, I do want to go over some of the things that this podcast is going to be centered around, so that way you understand exactly uh, what we are going to be focused on and what you're going to be watching. But first, let me just throw out our sponsor here. Emerald Dragon Games. EmeraldDragonGames.com is our sponsor of our podcast tonight, and you can go check them out at EmeraldDragonGames.com. Where right now they have Magic the Gathering Double Masters Draft Booster Box pre-orders at the low price of $269.99, including shipping and handling. And so go check them out, and remember during this trying time to support all of your local LGSs and to give them show them some love, so that way whenever all of this quarantine and lockdown is over, we actually have a place to go back to and play some Magic. So that is emeralddragongames.com. They're our sponsor for tonight. So let's get into what our actual what is a barrier to entry podcast. And whenever Giga and I was going over it, and we were coming up with what we want to do, what we want to focus on, you got a million podcasts out there. So we wanted something that was unique and yet still focused on Magic the Gathering in a way that brings information to you guys, but it brings it in our way. We're not scripted. We don't I don't have anything scripted in front of me. This is real and raw reaction. So what our podcast actually is we're looking to do a weekly or bi-weekly Magic the Gathering news. So as news is released from Wizards of the Coast, we want to be able to cover it and bring it to you. We also looking for hot topics in Magic the Gathering itself. So Giga and myself, we scour the internet and we look for hot topics. We actually just came across one, so we're going to be discussing it after this particular podcast, and maybe bring you a shorter podcast that is a little bit more focused around those type of topics. So look for that in the future. We're also looking to discuss formats and different decks within the format. What decks are problemsome, what decks need bannings, what decks shouldn't have been banned, things of that nature. And we're also going to discuss formats as a whole, like the health of the format, uh, why a format is changing so rapidly or not changing at all, or what needs to happen, or what we would love to have happen for the format to evolve. Next is we're going to give you real and raw reaction to everything good and bad in Magic. And this particular podcast is centered around the barrier to entry, and it's centered around what it's actual the namesake of the podcast itself. So you'll be able to understand and see our actual reaction and our raw opinions. And I want to point this out to everyone. These are our opinions. No way do we have any communications with Wizards of the Coast themselves other than the press releases that we get and what our interpretations of them. So do not take this as, gold, take it to the bank. This is the way we feel and what we want to express to you guys and get your opinion on. And then, if you leave a comment in the comment section, Gig and I do read them and we do respond to them. So feel free. If you hate it, let us know. If you don't, and you like what we're doing and you want to see certain things, let us know and we can work with that. And The last thing that we're looking for as this podcast picks up speed and gets a little bit more notoriety is we're looking to bring on future special guests for our discussions, and it could be anyone. Um, from Magic Pros to hopefully one day we get game designers and we can talk to them and ask them why did they design the card this way, or why did they let X design through playtesting and R&D, and we can actually get real information from the source itself. So that's what our podcast is. And like I said, excuse me, and like I said, the barrier to entry is a real problem, and that's why we really wanted to focus on this for our initial podcast. So when we talk about barrier to entry, now that introductions is over, first let me introduce myself. Let me just backtrack just for a second before we get into the discussion. I'm Antonio MTG on Twitch and on YouTube, and I've been playing Magic since 1994. Granted, in 1994 I was 14 years old and didn't know what the hell I was doing playing Magic, but I've been playing competitive Magic since 2011, and I won the Detroit GP in 2018 with two of my good friends and teammates, Coco Lopez and William Corson, and we won that GP. And then I also played in the Pro Tour London, which was the first Pro Tour with the London Mulligan. So that was quite interesting. I did make day two, had a decent day one record, but I did make day two, cashed into the money, and that's basically who I am. Somebody who's played at the highest levels of Magic, really loves and enjoys Magic, and just wants to see the game evolve into something that's sustainable, and we'll get into that discussion during the actual discussions portion, but something that is sustainable for the future. So Giga, tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Again, my name is Giga. Long full name is Gigapound here, but that just shows how dated I am when it comes to usernames. But anyways, I've been playing Magic since essentially its inception. I remember sitting here casting lightning bolts. Birds of Paradise. I thought was like the best card ever printed ever at a point. Played all the way since essentially early Urza Saga and on, and been playing competitive Magic. I mean, I've rarely gone to large events per se, only due to my lack of travel, due to schooling, lack of funds, things of that nature. But I have been playing. I've been the local warrior in my areas for a long time. Fortunately, I haven't won a GP or anything like that, like Antonio has. But definitely, I'm a brewer. I go to formats and I bring crazy decks, and I've had a lot of success in the local areas just with bringing like the hottest, spiciest brews you've ever seen.
Oh yeah, and that definitely it's one of the reasons. Giga is also my one of my moderators on the stream, and he helps a lot with the brewing of decks because I'm not a brewer. I've never been a brewer. I can brew, but it's usually a very weak shell that I need somebody who does a lot more brewing to really tweak it out and say, hey, you forgot this, and what about this? Oh, you love all these 4 mana cards, but what the hell are you doing from turn 1 to 3? And so I'm more of a pilot. You give me a deck, I can tweak that deck that is fully built and ready to go to the current meta. So it just shows us a little bit of difference between the two of us. But now that the introductions are out of the way, let's get into the meat, into the sauce. Let's get into it. So the barrier to entry. When we say barrier to entry, what comes to mind to you, Giga?
Well, the difficulty of getting into the Magic format as a whole here. I mean, just clearly, as we state, barrier to entry. What is the gatekeeper that we have to talk to in order to get into this format?
Right. So basically, what we want to know is why does it cost so much to play Magic the Gathering? And that is the real thing that a lot of people, especially newer players, you see this big giant drive with Arena, and in Arena they're trying to drive and push new players into the format, or not into the format, but into the game in general, and yet even Arena itself has a barrier to entry. So in here in a second, I'm going to show you a graphic of some of the what the average cost it takes to play each of the formats, and I'll show that in just a second. But if you look at Arena, right, everybody's like, well, it's free to play. You are correct. It is free to play if you want a sucky deck for until rotation, and hopefully you make gold. Maybe you make platinum. If you're lucky and your jank brew gets there, because you do not get enough rewards in order to consistently build the decks needed to make it into those higher tiers of like platinum, diamond, and mythic plus. To put it out there, I spend roughly $250 per set release on Arena just to make sure I have all the cards. So as the meta shifts, I'm able to shift with it and get up to mythic over and over again. How do you feel about it?
Uh, I mean, Arena is a good program in general. The only thing is that again, the money of trying to come into a format and play Arena effectively, it's just a very large money dump now.
And we've noticed that with video games, even like if you say like Call of Duty, yeah, the game itself may only cost you $29.99 to buy it and download it and put it on your Xbox or your PC or whatever, but then it's the expansion packs, or the loot crates in their case. And if you think about it, an expansion set to Magic the Gathering is nothing but a loot crate. You're just paying to augment the original game that started in 1994. The base of the game is still the same. The base of Call of Duty is still the same from Call of Duty 1. But if you don't have these loot crates, then, you're behind everyone else who can afford those loot crates. So therefore, you have a barrier to entry on even video games in general, especially the way video games, everybody has gone to loot crates. If you think about World of Warcraft, you're like, well, there's no loot crates in World of Warcraft, but there's a store. Now, whereas you don't get items to boost your character, so to speak, but there's the expansion packs. That's a loot crate. You're still playing the exact same WoW on the exact same WoW engine, and yet all you did was download new patches, and the patches themselves, as you bought the expansion, is what changed the game from the original, classic WoW, whatever vanilla, whatever you want to call it. It's no different than in Magic. Every time you buy a booster pack, it's like buying a loot crate. It's $3.99 loot crate. Maybe you get the cards you need, maybe you don't. It's just a random roll, RNG loot crate is all a booster pack is. So anyway, now that that little tangent's over with, uh, why does it cost so much to play Magic? Well, one of the problems is this: the average cost per format. I mean, what do you think of this? The top 10% of the meta decks, and if you look at our legend here, it goes left to right: Standard, Pioneer, Modern, Legacy. Top 10% of the meta decks. These would be your tier 1 decks, so to speak. Tier 0, tier 1, whatever you want to call it. $334 to play Standard. How much did it cost you to start playing Standard back, what, up teen years ago?
God Almighty. Let's see. The first F&M event that I walked into, I played a mono black discard rat deck, which was just absolutely atrocious. But it cost me probably about, I don't know, the most expensive card in my deck at the time when Underworld Dreams was an actual good rare. Probably cost me about, I mean, and these were cards that I literally had just pulled from booster packs. I mean, but overall to fix my deck, I think I spent about $20 on top of all these cards. And keep in mind, Underworld Dreams was a $10 card back in the day.
Oh, yes. Well, I
And so, I mean, overall, my deck probably costs about 50, $60. And I walked in and I was just like, hey, you know what? Make them discard cards, resource denial, get increment damage through, and play a lot of kill spells on creatures and call it a day. So, I mean, overall, it was like less than $50 to really play an okay deck back in the day.
well I
But the,
remember you know, I remember the first time I played a tournament GP. I played Boros Exalted, and that deck cost me about $89, $90. You know, the most expensive pieces of it was the one Cavern of Souls, at the time Sublime Archangel, and Noble Hierarch. And I think Noble Hierarch was like $12. And I was like, who in the hell is playing $12 for a single card? You know, it like blew my mind. like,
mhm.
like $12? What? Cavern of Souls is like was like $7, and I'm like, man, that's two booster packs, man. I'll just open up two booster packs of Return to Ravnica and see if I get one. At least then I'm getting 30 cards, and that's the whole thing is, and this was in 2011, so we're not talking like you know 1994. I remember buying a box of Alpha from Electronics Boutique for $4.99. It was marked down $3 from $7.99 because nobody was buying them. And they're like, oh, we have these on sales. And I walked in and was traded in, I think at the time I was trading in Sega Genesis games, like the old Sega Genesis, and they had none of the new games that I wanted, and also I didn't have enough money from my trade-ins to get a new game that I did want. And he was like, "Hey man, why don't you check these out? It's pretty cool." And I was like, "Sure, why not?" you know, for $4, I was buying boxes of Alpha. So we're not talking about way back then, you know, not boxes, but starter decks. Um, we're talking 9 years ago, Giga. 9 years was the most expensive deck I can remember from 9 years ago was about $150. And the people that were playing that, I looked at them and said, "Y'all are idiots. Who in the hell would ever pay $150 for a standard deck? What are y'all doing?" You know what I'm saying? And now you look at today, the average cost of a standard deck is $334 of today's standard. If you're in the top 10%, 287 if you're in the 8% to 3%. That's your 1.5 to what? Tier 2 decks. And then your tier 2 and below decks, $296. And the reason they're more than your tier 1.5 to tier 2 decks is there just that many more of them that may have that one splash card. So it averaged out a little bit more. But for the most part, it's all on par. 334, same. And then if you look at Pioneer, Pioneer is nothing but standard plus, in my opinion. You don't have fetch lands, cowards. Um, but $511, but the tier 2 is $320. And then the tier whatever below tier 2, it's $532 for Pioneer, $859 for Modern. It's the average cost of a deck in Modern. And that's a barrier to entry. You want people to play these formats, and yet you make it virtually impossible for them to play the format. Like, look at this here. $1,254, bro. Are you kidding me? For me to get a tier 2 deck, it's 1,200. I might as well pay $859 for the tier 1 deck. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's average cost. I mean, what do you think about it? Is it ridiculous? Is it on par? Is this just the way the game is going?
Oh, I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it's just the fact that, I mean, you sit here and you look at the total cost of entering the game, just any format in general, standard, pioneer, modern, whatever. I mean, even Commander. Oh my God, don't even get me started on Commander. Yeah, we'll talk about that here in a minute. But oh my goodness, just yeah. I mean, look at the standard. Some of your top decks here: $600, 1,200. Pioneer 800. It's just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, and I sit here and I drew up like a little flow chart for myself on this side here to keep me on it on the path here. But I feel like as a new player, the only ways that you can really get into this game and acquire a collection, and I asked a couple of my other friends about this too, is that in order to really get into Magic, Wizards is if you don't want to sit here and drop these crazy amounts of dollars on the secondary market, if you want to just help try and support Wizards themselves, sit here. The best way to do is that you go to your local store and support your local store. Is that you start drafting and you start obtaining a collection. And also I'm going to also preface this too with the fact that this is how I really, really, really started getting into the Magic community as a whole, and not just some random F&M kid coming there, with a random mono black rat stack. um, for me to start obtaining collection, I was able to go and I started drafting because they had an option after F&M. They're like, "Hey, who wants to draft after F&M?" And I would stay there until God 1 in the morning, drafting. And I would draft, and then you win. You get booster packs or credit, depending on how you do. If you pull a really sick card, you can trade that in for credit to start building towards architects, or archetypes, I should say, in the formats that you want to play, and then you can finally play the deck that you actually want to play. And I feel like that's the only way to do it. But now, even then, like back in the day, standard decks were not very expensive. I mean, for anything that was even mildly competitive. I mean, unfortunately, I did start when like some of the most expensive cards ever were to hit standard, because when I started truly playing competitive Magic, it was Mirrodin Block, Kamigawa, Ravnica. So unfortunately, shock lands were the first big hot thing, and that was just a crazy. You want to talk about one of the most expensive mana bases you had? I understand it was pretty expensive back in Onslaught too, when the fetch lands were first got printed. But I mean, the fact is that God, I was trying to go on. Unfortunately, my local didn't have anything. Everybody who had full time jobs, I was just a kid in high school at the time. I didn't have a full time job. I was trying to scour eBay at the early hours of the morning, losing sleep, trying to get shock lands for a decent price so I can actually play constructed Magic.
Yeah, exactly. And like whenever I first started playing like truly competitive and going to GPs, that was during Magic Origins. And I remember because you had the cons fetches, cons and Fate Reforged and whatever dragons fetches. And I remember playing Bant Coco, right? And at the time I had a really good job. I was making a lot of money, didn't have any bills. So yes, I could afford to drop $100 on Jace Vryn's Prodigies. And to me, it seemed insane, but I'm like, well, I guess that's just the way Magic is going if I'm going to play a top tier deck. And I won some of the, what do they call those? Game day challenges at the time. I placed very high in the qualifiers to PPTQs, enough to get into a PTQ. But I had to drop $900 on a standard deck. And at the time, I didn't play Modern. I didn't even know what the hell Modern was, to be honest with you. But I didn't play Modern. So $900 seemed normal, for standard because everybody else was playing it. I'm like, well, if I paid 900, they paid 900. I guess this is a norm. But then I ran into Modern. And my first deck in Modern, by the way, was Red Green Ponza. And at the time, it was like $700. Top end was $700 if you got like all the ridiculous, planeswalkers that they were playing before Kaladesh Chandra came out. And because they played like Trinispheres and Blood Moons and Ensnaring Bridges and Engineered Explosives. And it was just literally Ponza Prison. But all those cards were expensive. And I was like, what the hell? I paid $700 for this Ponza deck, which was really fun, really cool, but it wasn't by no means top tier. And the Ponza deck was cheaper than my standard deck. And, uh, Modern was supposed to be an eternal format, and God help you, whenever I first got into Legacy, first deck I built was Cloud Post with freaking candelabras. And at the time, candelabras was only $200, and I about had a heart attack over that. So, I mean, City of Traders at the time was like $60. But anyway, that's a whole nother bag of worms. But that's what I'm saying is we have this barrier to entry. You want to get new players in. Well, to bring them into drafts, all you're doing is setting them up for the quote unquote sharks. You know what I'm saying? You're setting them up for the people who's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna prey all over these suckers. And to me, whenever I first got back into Magic, I knew what constructed was, but I didn't have a collection. So just like you, Giga, is I went for uh, drafts. I was like, hey, I can pick, one, I'm not a deck builder, so it was a little rougher for me because it took me a little bit longer to actually make something that was cohesive and functional. But I ended up getting sharked out by everybody that does nothing but draft. And it was a deterrent to me because I'm like, I'm spending $25 to enter this draft and I'm getting ruffle stomped like every match, every game, every time I play, and that's not fun to me. I want to at least have the feeling like I could win. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So so when you're talking about bringing a brand new player off the street, and if they go and do any research like we've done here, which is one of the reasons in this particular episode we do have a PowerPoint that we're showing you, and so that way, if it is a new player that is watching this podcast, they're not getting blindsided by what it's going to cost to play this game. And that's ridiculous because it should not cost this much. Plain and simple, no standard deck should cost $350, you know, but it's the fact that it does. That's the problem. That's your barrier to entry into the game in general. But let's just, oh, excuse me, let's forget about the game. Say you've been playing a while. Giga, you've been playing a while. We're going to use you as an example. You've been playing a while, and now you want to make the leap because standard got boring, and you want to make the leap from standard to modern. Do you think that a new player who's never played modern, has no modern cards, is going to be enticed to go and play it? Well, no, they built a new format.
Tony, say that one more
$100
time here.
more.
Oh, sorry, you kind of cut out there for a second,
Oh,
Tony.
what I was saying is making the jump from standard to modern or standard to pioneer. you know, do you think that a new player, not even a new player, say it's somebody who's been playing for 2 years now, and they want to standard stale, they're bored with it, they want to try something else, their LGS is running modern also, do you think they can make that jump? Like easily?
No, it's very difficult. I mean, so one way that I've seen people do that is that you need to build a top tier deck, you need to stick it out, you need to play it, and you have to literally just get store credit if you don't want to. Um, I mean, essentially, you have to go to your FNM or whatever your weekly events, whatever day they may run. Any sanctioned events your LGS is running. Make sure you always support your LGS and um, make sure that you like actually are good enough at the game and play a good enough deck. But that's the thing is that just to get into it, like we already showed these prices here, it's very difficult to play this game or whatever. And yes, I understand that there are certain decks that we haven't listed here that are much more inexpensive. But it's the fact that it's still there's no top standard deck, even for standard, your most recent cards to be less than almost like $200.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, during you remember when Nexus of Fate and Wilderness Reclamation was in the format? I have a
Uh-huh.
friend who wheeled and dealed and traded and traded and traded until he finally built the deck. And he had it for 3 months, and that's all he played. He couldn't play nothing else because he didn't have the money to buy anything else, and he just played Wilderness Rec, and he built up store credit, and he was able to buy a set of fetch lands, and he started building Urza, whatever, Urza Thopter Sword. But then Mox Opal got banned. That's a whole nother story. But that's a whole nother episode right there. But anyway, so Mox Opal gets banned, but he spent all this time trying to get the lands because the barrier was so thick that he could not break through it. Even in standard, where he literally looked at me and said, "Man, I don't even know if I want to go to F&M tonight." I was like, "Why is that?" He's like, "I am tired of playing Wilderness Wreck, but it's the only deck I got that is reasonable." So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I completely get it. I mean, I was in a very similar situation years ago back in the cons format where, with all the cost of all the fetch lands and everything like that, it was just so difficult to really switch a deck when you get tired of playing a deck. Unfortunately for me, I'm a monster, and I can play the same deck over and over and over again without really getting sick and tired, and unless you see a very large meta shift with a new set release or something like that. I mean, I essentially ended up playing from the beginning just Guy Dragons and continuing there on out throughout essentially almost the entire survival of the cons format, just because that's what the example I used. But I mean, even then, it's like trying to switch decks in this format right now is very difficult, because all of a sudden you're dropping, tens, 30, 40, 80, 90, hundreds of dollars of just to switch a deck. And I mean, that's the problem. Is like you sit here and you want to compare it to like video games or something. You sit here and you buy a DLC pack for $50 and you have everything said and done. You don't have to worry about, switching back and forth.
exactly. So with our barrier to entry, especially, like Standard, Modern, Pioneer, Legacy, if you notice, we did not include Vintage or Commander because, one, Vintage is a degenerate format that, elitist EPs just play to show off their pocketbooks. That's my personal opinion. If you're somebody that plays Vintage, mad respect to you. You kept those cards forever, or you spent, a small fortune to get them. But outside, I don't want to discuss $20,000 decks. I want to discuss formats that actually have, F&Ms tied to them. That actually have like GPs and Star City game events tied to them. So, but what are some of the reasons that this exists in the first place? Well, the first thing I have to say is the reserve list. Why? Why is there a reserve list? What purpose does it even serve? And the purpose is it serves nothing. It serves the elitist people in Wizards, in Magic in general, and that's the only group that it serves. You have these 10. This is just part of the reserve list here, and the reserve list is expansive. And just so you know what the reserve list is, for anybody that doesn't know, and this is mostly for new players or people new to the game, the reserve list was an agreement that Wizard made with players in 1998 because they were moaning and complaining, trying to keep this PG and not get super tilted about it. But they were moaning and complaining at the reprint of revise of their card values going down. Now you want to keep the Power 9 on the reserve list? Fine. Who cares? Your boxes and your Black Lotuses, sure. Those weren't reprinted in the revised white border anyway. But the biggest reasons decks cost what they cost is their mana base. And why is there a reserve list? I don't get it. It's if Wizards does not acknowledge the secondary market like they keep preaching and preaching, then why in the hell is there a reserve list? Because the reserve list is the epitome of acknowledging there's a secondary market. Saying these cards cost money. We know they cost money, so therefore we will not reprint them. Now, mind you, that does not mean things cannot come off the reserve list, because in 2008, or no, 2006, things came off the reserve list and a few more cards got added to it. And the last change to the reserve list was in 2010. And yet, people need these lands to play Legacy. They don't really need them to play Commander, but it really makes their competitive Commander decks, if you want to call anything in Commander competitive, but it makes their competitive Commander decks better. You know, a Badlands costing $150, a tropical island costing $250 a piece, underground seas $500. I mean, you're spending $2 grand on a damn deck before you even get out of the mana base. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's am I crazy? Do I'm the only one who thinks get the rid? I don't care what it affects your Magic collection. Let me tell you something. If you have an Alpha Underground Seeds that's worth $6 grand and they've reprinted a new Underground Seeds next year in whatever Eternal Masters, Vintage Masters set, whatever the hell you want to call it, Reserve List Masters for all I care. You think that Alpha Underground Sea is going to devalue to the point that it affects their collection? No, it's not. But you're giving people the opportunity to play a format that they prior could not play. You're taking away the elitist part of it and bringing in the gathering part, which is what the game is all about. What do you say? Am I crazy?
No, I mean you're 100% right. I mean I completely agree with you on that front. I mean the thing is that there's more people would play the game if these cards weren't on a reserve list or anything like that and would be able to do things. I'll tell you right now, for example, my local back in New York would run unsanctioned events, just for funsies. Kids could come in and play and stuff like that. I have never seen more 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds. I mean, we're talking about kids that are fresh in, eighth graders, freshmen in high school, kids coming in and playing legacy decks at the time like literal gods. There was a kid that I would sit down against him, and we all know little kid luck exists, and well, that's a topic for another day. But it's the fact that this kid would come in and he would pick out this little proxy decks, and literally they would print off cards or whatever, cut them out little pieces, on the pieces of paper or whatever with scissors and stuff in the store, would stick those down into between, there would be like, basic island or whatever, but it's being covered up by this like little card and it wasn't showing or whatever. But they would let the little kids rent proxy decks because, no kid in 12th grade, when they're in ninth grade or whatever was going to be able to afford these legacy decks. And my experiences playing legacy is that I was playing my real legacy deck at the time because being an adult I was able to afford these things, for crazy obscene prices, unfortunately. But I mean, I would sit down against this kid and he would pilot Manaless Dredge in Legacy and Legacy Storm better than so many people I've ever seen try and pick up the deck and play. And this kid, and it turns out he was just going home and repping the deck with his friends over and over and over again. Then when he came down and we played these little unsanctioned events for local store credit and stuff like that, it was just, for us to try and do it. He would walk to first place a lot because this kid put in his reps and times. But I'm like, man, if this kid could actually afford this deck and take it to an event and travel, man, he would be a force to be reckoned with. But again, this barrier to entry, sitting here just staring at all of these current dual lands right now is one of the biggest barriers to this game. And it's sad to see that young talent can't really play this game without having money, unfortunately.
Exactly. And people like me and you, Giga, and even people like LSV, even though he's a Hall of Famer, he'll probably never quit playing Magic, get paid to play it for the rest of his life, whatever, or until the game actually ends itself, or dies, or whatever you want to call it. But people like me and you, the grinders, so to speak, or whatever you want to call us, the tryhards, I don't care what the hell you call us, to be honest with you, but we're getting older. And if there's not somebody to take our place and, pick up the mantle and continue playing, then this game that we have dedicated so much of our time, our life, our finances, our money to, it will die. It will just cease to exist. And while that may not happen for 10 years or 15 years, but it's the old saying. There's a reason the military goes out and recruits 17 and 18-year-olds over every year nonstop. Whenever I was in the military, uh, I served in a recruit depot, or a recruiting station, I should say, and we were constantly going out. You know why? Because soldiers get old and they can no longer fight, and we have to have new soldiers to replace those soldiers that are no longer able to fight. You know, and it's the same principle in anything. Even corporate America, as people retire, they have to go out and recruit new people to take their place. Well, it's the same thing here in this game. WoW did a big push with the simplification of everything because their player base was getting older, and they simplified the game. What they didn't realize is it being a game that players are so entrenched in that they actually hurt themselves more doing it, but that's a whole nother topic and on a very different podcast that isn't Magic the Gathering. But what I'm saying is they realized that their player base was getting older, and they tried to make changes to infuse new life into it. Well, it's like you just said about the kid playing Manaless Dredge, right? Uh, if he could afford a legacy deck, then I'm sure his parents could have got him to an event. Because there's events all over the country. So I'm sure there may have been one within 2 or 3 hours that he could have went to and played in. But because he couldn't play, that talent was wasted. Just gone. It's no longer there, no longer exists. He he might not even play the game anymore. He might. I don't know. I don't know the kid from Adam. But I know there's a lot of good, talented people here where I live that quit playing because they couldn't afford it anymore. And that's the problem. That's the issue. And that's why I have to ask the question, the reserve list. Why? Why are you gating people out of a format that you support competitively? You know, and to use the excuse of, well, players got mad. Yes, in 1998, when your company was floundering and you were still trying to get off the ground, you've only been open for 4 years, and Alpha was a freaking disaster because people would get starter decks with like 26 lands in it and whatnot. But we're 27 years later. We're not floundering anymore. The game has 20 million people that play it, so to speak, according to what, Wizards released. Why do you need the reserve list? That value of those old cards are not going to go down. I don't see why you can't reprint these cards. And that's my personal opinion, you know. And that brings us to our next one. The modern barrier. Same thing. Lands. Fetch lands. They refuse to reprint them. They literally said they are not going to reprint fetch lands in standard this year. But they also don't acknowledge the secondary market. But Giga, what did they do to acknowledge the secondary market? We had this discussion.
Right. Yeah. It's. I mean, so they literally said, "Oh, well, we're gonna sell these new alternate art fetch land packs. Only one fetch land of the enemy fetches, not even all 10, just 5, to the LGSs to quote unquote support them from the Secret Top series. But it's horrendously expensive. I mean, in fact, my local here in the area that I'm living in now, they literally sat here and said that the cards were going to cost, like the what is it, the secret drop or whatever was going to cost them like $400
Yeah.
for 5 cards. Five, not even play sets, not even play sets of cards which you are required to have for your decks.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I mean, I talked to a couple of my buddies at the distributors, the local distributors here. We got a GDS distributor here in Jacksonville, Florida. I talked to a bunch of the game stores, and they're having to pay $399 for that secret lair. Well, to me, that's Wizard saying, hey, we know what the price of these enemy fetches are, and we've never reprinted them in a standard set. They reprinted the allied fetches and cons, but they didn't reprint the enemy fetches. You know, so like your Arid Mesa and your Scalding Tarn and your Verdant Catacomb, Marsh Flats, I believe. Marsh Flats, yeah. Marsh Flats and Misty Rainforest have not been reprinted since what? When were they first printed? First Zendikar, right? Yeah. It's like you want people to play in modern. Modern is considered by everyone. You look anywhere on YouTube, anybody talking about it from Saffron Olive to Pleasant Kenobi to Tolarian Community College. All of those people will tell you modern's the most popular format in Magic. It's the format everybody wants to play. It's the format that has quite possibly the best in power balance, and yet, unless you're playing mono red prison, half the damn people out there can't afford to play it, and that's a problem. I will tell you a personal experience. I got injured last year. Had to sell my whole collection to pay for doctor's visits, medication, rehab, rehabilitation, everything. Things that was above and beyond my insurance because I went with the cheapest insurance I could find because I'm a cheapskate. But anyway, so I rebuilt my collection this year, and Giga, I bought $200 of fetches from you. You know, I just completed all of the Scalding Tarn's Verdict, Catacombs, those the enemy fetches that haven't been reprinted in forever, and that was another $1,500. I mean, that's ridiculous. But because I play competitive Magic, I know I need them. But I'm fortunate enough to have a good job to be able to afford them, and also have low debt, by the way. But that's besides the point. You know, I mean, if you look at it, how many people are being barred from playing and then get discouraged? Because look at Standard now. You play Luca Fires, or you play Luca Fires, or you play Luca Fires. How boring is that? You know what I'm saying? How boring is that? People get bored, they want to play something else, and then they're like, oh, I can't play nothing else. And then once they stop playing, say they stop going to F&M, it's like, oh, it's just Standard. I ain't going. I got other things to do. Well, now they're no longer in the game because it only takes missing a couple 3 to 4 F&Ms for them to realize that maybe I want to do something else with my time. Whereas if they could play modern at the modern F&Ms, gives them another alternative. So as in the words of Pleasant Kenobi, Vince on the internet. Wait, no, Vince Pleasant Kenobi on the internet. Reprint fetch lands, you cowards. And that is his saying, his words. Go check out his merch. Go check out his YouTube and his Twitch. Really cool dude to listen to. But he's not wrong. Is he wrong?
No, I mean he's not wrong. I mean I don't really watch that much of his content or whatever, other than the fact that he's definitely one of my Death and Taxes brothers in Legacy, by the way.
Oh yeah.
That was my deck. Unfortunately, that deck's almost nigh unplayable in Legacy now.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, no, I mean that's the thing is like I never felt more disheartened when we keep sitting here and it's like we need fetch lands back in Standard. The excuses Wizards has given is not valid, and I hate the fact that they even stated that it was taking up too much camera time when it came to fetch lands in Standard. But here's the thing: well, they had the con fetches, right? They didn't have shock lands, which are very easy to get in Modern. And in fact, the problem is that they had fetch lands with the buddy or tango lands, whichever your preferred terminology for those was. Back in, so you're sitting here and you had to do a math equation on trying to figure out, okay, well, I sit here and I have 2 basics, but yet I can bring this into play tap, or if I fetch a basic, the tango land in my hand then comes into play untapped, which then means I can do this, but I'm playing possibly something now, or this. Like, it was very convoluted. There was a lot of times that fetching in a very tight format back in cons, and we keep going back to this, and this is the last time that fetches were back in a standard format, they made it difficult. If they would have just printed fetch lands in Zendikar this year, like where they originally had the enemy fetches when they introduced those, it would be very easy with Triomes because they just come into play, tapped, period, end of story. You have fixed mana, but you're going to be a turn behind, period. And it would be very simple. It wouldn't be a math equation. It wouldn't be anything.
Yeah, and they're like, well, what's in Standards legal in Pioneer. Well, if you don't want the enemy fetches in Pioneer, just preemptive ban them like you did with the freaking Allied fetches. I mean, I don't see the problem in that. you know. And it's like they another excuse they said is, it created too much consistency in the decks. Well, hey, you idiots, have you not seen the 80 card freaking Yorion piles that seem to be ultra consistent? They always have what they need when they need it. You know why? Because y'all have pushed the daggum power level of standard to the point that, hell, print fetches too. We're giving you cards like Uro and Yorion and Luca going to get Agent of Treachery. Why the hell shouldn't you have, consistent mana also? Well, they say they printed this power level so that way people always have something to do on each of their turns and have mana to, have things to spend mana on. Well, hell, if that's the case, then you might as well give them perfect mana while we're at it. They are chicken shit, little freaking sky is falling, not reprinting fetches. It's a mistake. It will always be a mistake. It is something that the entire player base needs, no matter what format you play, whether it's Legacy, Modern, Commander, Canadian Highlander, Vintage. Every format needs them. And if you want to keep them out of Pioneer because you want that just to be Standard Plus, then preemptive ban them. But the fact is that they don't want them in Pioneer, so they don't want to print them into Standard because they don't want Standard to be better than Pioneer, their new baby format. And quite frankly, they allow things like Inverter and Thassa's Oracle in freaking Pioneer, and you're going to tell me that, oh, it's the reason it's a turn 4 deck is because of fetch lands? Well, hey, you stupid idiots. It would be a turn 4 deck anyway, because they got to get the 4 freaking mana just to cast Inverter. They got to get the 6 mana just to win. So, and they got all these stupid lands anyway that's fixing their mana, and it's a 2 color deck. Oh, we don't want 3 color decks to be a thing. Well, anyway, 3 color decks are a thing now. There's a 5 color Niv to Light freaking Luca Yorion Fires deck in freaking Standard now.
Thank you, Fires of Invention, for not making us care about mana costs.
Exactly. It's like,
I mean,
hey,
yeah.
oh,
I
go
mean,
ahead,
like,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, like I'm playing 5 colors Wishboard Fires for funsies in historic and standard, and I don't have to care because if I sit here play a Fires, play something else, whatever. Hopefully I'm not trying to give my opponent information, but I sit here and it's like, oh well, my main board is literally Jeskai or Grixis, depending on my mood for the day, and then literally is I sit here and I go cast Granted off of Fey Wishes, Granted get my Kaya's Wrath or whatever, and then it's like, oh look at that, that's black white, that's half the time not even some of the colors I'm even playing, and then boom, board wipe them. Like who cares? I mean, and then as much too, I don't even have green in the deck, and I have uh, plain wide celebration or whatever for the sideboard. So I sit here and I get to just proliferate 4 times, nickel bolas, and win the game.
Exactly. That's my whole point, man. It's like, and we can go on for 2 more hours. We are trying to keep this reasonable. It's a little bit longer tonight because we wanted to explain what our podcast was, but here's how do we fix all this? Number one, what's the number one way to fix it? Remove the reserve list. Let's start there. Just get rid of it. I don't give a shit about your daggone. And by the way, this is PG-13, just so you know. But I don't care about your collection. I don't care about my collection. So get rid of the reserve list. I want to play Magic, and I want to play Magic in the formats I want to play it in. And if that means getting rid of the reserve list to allow me to do so, then so be it. Have at it. The reserve list was a backroom handshake between Wizards and players. There was no contract written up on it. If you want to go check out the reserve list, you can check out the Magic Historian, and he did an entire video on it, so go check him out. But get rid of the reserve list. Yes or no?
Yes, completely agree. And also with that too is that just one note, Ad, and this is my personal segment on it. If this was a backroom handshake for individuals to help Wizards get off the coast. Let's also talk about just like the time frame here. That was 20 something years ago, and these weren't like kids coming out of high school and they're only in their mid 40s and stuff. No, these were people in their early late 30s at this point. 25 years later, they're pretty much at getting close to retirement age. If they haven't been able to flip these cards, make a profit, turn this into more profitable stock market investment, things of that nature by now, if for some reason these cards that they're sitting on, these booster boxes at alpha, is their retirement plan, that just seems ridiculous to me. I'm sorry. And again, and that's also Wizards stating that they can't acknowledge the secondary market, but oh man, are they acknowledging the secondary market?
Well, and that's exactly right. Uh, the people that they made the handshake deal with is were collectors, not your average player. They were pro players at the time who were collectors and had a lot of money, who bought up all these copies and started seeing that, hey, this game actually lasted 4 years. This could actually be a real thing long term. So they started bitch moaning and complaining, and back then Wizards didn't have the player base they have now. They didn't have 25 million people playing the game worldwide. They had, 100,000, so to speak, given a reference number. Uh, so they said, okay, we promise you we'll never reprint these cards. Well, that's one, that was Wizards of the Coast that has been sold 2 times over and is now owned by Hasbro. Hasbro has made no such promise. So if Hasbro was smart and want to turn, I guarantee you, you say we're doing rid of all land bases on the reserve list. They are now available to be reprinted. And you announce like a whatever alpha reprint, pseudo reprint, whatever the hell you want to call it. I don't even know. But you announce that, Hasbro will make freaking $500 million. The printers will not be able to keep up with the demand. I'm almost willing to bet it. Willing to put everything I own on the fact of that happening. They will make, cause they don't care. Like Hasbro don't care what the individual card costs. What they care about is how many booster boxes Wizards is printing and selling to distributors. That's what they care about. They care about their bottom line and their investors in or stakeholders. Yeah, that's right. That's what they care about. So, we're in agreement. Reserve list, get it out of here. Secondly, fetch lands, reprint them. Just do it. Put it. You can't put them in Zendikar. Zendikar's already been printed. It's over and done when you miss that boat. Perfect opportunity, by the way, because Shocklands would be rotating and you would have nothing but triomes. But hey, we're smarter than they are, and apparently because they're idiots. But and this is not saying everybody at Wizards is an idiot. I'm saying their policy on this is stupidity. Uh, but fetch lands, how often should they be reprinted? What's your opinion on that?
Honestly, I think should be reprinted every couple of years here just to keep it fresh, introduce, new formats, and also just provides mana fixing. You don't even need to have multi functional lands like the shock lands, multi-typed maybe a better word for it, but like just a better. You don't even need to have like dual lands, tri lands. Eventually we'll just get a quad land, a 5 land, whatever. Eventually, that's my dream here. But anyways, it just they need to be reprinted every couple years or whatever. Just the fact that it keeps the cost low for the game, because I always want to go back to watching this kid who played Manaless Dredge. He played almost Manaless Storm. Just seeing young talent knowing that they can't officially play the game. That what I respect my local more for just being able to let these kids come in for a place to get out of the house, socialize. I mean, these kids are also learning a lot from us adults and our experiences. I mean, same thing that happened with me too. I got out of the house and I learned a lot more about life getting out of the house and talking to other people than this. But anyways, that's a topic for another day. But every couple years, reprint the fetch lands. In fact, even had a point have all 10 in a format so mana can be really good, even if you're fetching basic lands
Basics.
half the time. Like just fetch basics. Like understand that they need to get a different colored thing and just have better mana is a great understanding of the basics of how Magic is played.
Yeah, exactly. So, like we said, and we're in agreement. I totally agree. Reprint them every 2 to 3 years. If you want to alternate cycles, if you want to mix cycles, I don't care. Just reprint the damn things. If you want to go like 3 enemy and 2 allied in one set, and then a year and a half, 2 years later, you want to go the opposite, 3 allied and 2 enemy, I don't care. I really don't. Just reprint the damn cards. Put cards in the hands of the actual players. Your pro players who bitch, moan, and complain about this make up 1% of your player base, and they're not the masses. And that's what I got for you. That's what we have for you today. Thank you for watching, everybody. Uh, you know, just a few short going out Twitch. You can come check us out on our live streams every Monday and Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern, where we play some of the hottest, spiciest decks that are out there, whether it's Tier 1. We either play Standard, Modern, Legacy, or Pioneer. You can always check us out there. You can check us out at our YouTube channel at the YouTube link right here below us. Just copy that down. Also want to give a shout out to Wizards of the Coast. All the images today were courtesy of Wizards of the Coast and are used under the free and fair use policy. And prices were courtesy of MTG Goldfish and were derived from mtggoldfish.com. So with all of that being said, I'm Antonio MTG. That's Gigapond. This is the Barrier to Entry, and thank you for watching.